A Place Called Home by Laurie Wick. Chapter 55. Luke rolled and stretched, his body protesting the idea of getting out of bed. When something tickled his nose, Luke reached up and pulled away a stray hair. He smiled as it just kept coming. He wound the strand from Christine's head around his finger. It was time, he knew, time to come clean and confess to Christine what he had been holding back. He had been feeling the pain of disobedience in his heart long enough. It was time to talk with his wife and to trust God. "Oh, Luke, I thought you would be up. I really need to make that bed. I have so much to get done before the party." Christine spoke as she bustled around the room. The party for Grandma M. Luke had forgotten all about it. "Tomorrow, Lord," Luke promised. "Tomorrow I'll tell her." "Luke Cameron, are you going to get out of that bed today?" Christine stood at the foot, her brows raised in question. "You could come over here and help me." Luke's voice was gravelly with sleep. "Do I have your word that you will come out and I won't get pulled in?" At Luke's silence, Christine laughed. "I thought not." With a flick of her wrist, Christine threw back the covers, causing Luke to shiver and leap for the stove. "You're a cruel woman," he grumbled as he dressed quickly. But Christine had the bed half made and just ignored him. When the men came back in from the horses, Christine asked about the road. "I really need to get to town. The storm this week has put me behind schedule. I didn't even get to Grandma M's this week." Silas answered her. "I've got to go in this afternoon. You can go with me." "That's fine, Si, thanks. I can have supper almost ready before we go." It crossed Luke's mind to tell Christine he would rather she stay inside today. Knowing she would ask why, and that he had no reason, he held his tongue. "You're sure?" "Yes, I'm sure. I'll go straight over as soon as I'm done here and ride with them. You go back and I'll see you tonight." "Okay, but you be careful." "I'll be fine. Thanks for the ride, Silas." Christine turned away, but Silas still hesitated at the door of the general store. His business in town had been brief, and he had heard from some buyers and wanted to get home to tell Luke. Christine was to go to Mark and Sue's for a ride home. Silas went to head out to the sleigh. Christine was a big girl, and she would make the 2 blocks safely. "Is it almost time?" Emily danced around her mother's legs. "Almost. I've got to wrap up this cake and bundle up your sister. Don't forget, we have to pick up Grandma M too." "Won't Aunt Christine be surprised that we're coming early to help?" "I'm sure she will. Now don't forget to say happy birthday to Grandma M when we see her, and don't tell her what's in the box we wrapped." "I won't. Is it time to tell Daddy we're ready?" "Yes, you go ahead and tell him about 15 minutes." Emily, always happy to be of help, skipped off toward her father's office. "Red or blue?" Christine said under her breath. She needed calico for the border of her new quilt, and could go with either color. "Ma'am?" A voice broke through her thoughts. Christine looked down at the small child standing beside her. She didn't remember seeing this child before. Wordlessly, Christine was handed a note, and the child ran from the store. She stared after him in some surprise before reading the paper in her hand. "Christine," it read, "come immediately to the house. Grandma M has been hurt." The note was unsigned, but Christine was sure it was from Mark. The snow was deep, and it hindered Christine's progress as she rushed with a fearful heart. Of all things, Grandma M injured on her 71st birthday. Christine quickly climbed the front porch steps and rushed in the front door. "Gram?" Christine called as she quickly unbuttoned her coat and moved into the parlor. "By all means, Christine, take off your coat. You're going to be here a while." Christine's movements stilled, and she felt her blood run cold. Until that moment, she believed she would never hear the voice of Vince Jeffers again. He was seated on the sofa. Resting beside him on the seat, and close to his right, was a long, wicked-looking knife. "Take off your coat, Christine." This time it was an order, and Christine obeyed. She laid the coat over the nearest chair and looked up to see Vince's eyes moving over her. A leering smile played across his lips, and Christine felt dirty beneath his perusal. "Please, God," Christine thought, asking for she knew not what, just needing to cry out to her savior. "What are you doing here, Vince?" Christine was amazed at how calm her voice sounded. "I'm surprised you have to ask that, Christine. You didn't actually think I was going to let you get away with all that money, did you?" "What money?" Christine asked in genuine confusion. Vince's scornful laugh grated on Christine's nerves. "You're as big a fool as your grandfather was," he snarled at her as he stood up. Christine was still completely baffled, and Vince could see this. She watched, horrified, as the snarl on his face became almost a pleasant smile. This man was mad. "The railroad stocks," he informed her, as if he were announcing the time of day. "The railroad stocks? The ones you advised grandfather to sell because they were worthless?" "Yes, one and the same. He was a fool. He never even checked on my story. Just handed me the papers so I could take care of it." "But the stocks are worth something after all?" Christine asked, trying desperately to get some understanding of the situation, while praying constantly for help, helpless as it was. No one knew that Vince Jeffers was here, or that she was at Grandma M's. "Worth something?" Again, that scornful laugh. "They're worth a small fortune, but I can't touch it. By the time I realized I needed your grandfather's signature, he was already dead." No, I didn't kill him," Vince assured her upon seeing the look on her face. "But it was very nice of him to die when he did. I really am in deep financial trouble, you know." He stated this so calmly that Christine felt her stomach lurch. "Do I nauseate you, Christine?" Vince had not missed the look of revulsion on her face, and he approached slowly as he spoke. "That's really a shame, you know." He was almost next to her. "Because we're going to get to know one another very well." Christine had backed up, flush against the wall, and Vince stopped within inches of her. His hand came up to her face, and Christine tried to turn into the wall. Vince fed on her fear, and his laugh was a low hiss as sour breath fell on her face. She felt his fingers at the side of her neck. "Yes, Christine, very well indeed." "It's Mark," Silas said from his place at the window. Luke felt relief wash over him. He'd been anxious all day about Christine and couldn't wait to see her. Grandma M was the first one in the house. Silas and Luke both hugged her before she could get her coat off, wishing her birthday greetings. Not until Suzanne and Emily were inside and Mark, with the baby in his arms, began to shut the door, did Luke ask, "Where's Christine?" The room became completely still at his question. "Isn't she here, Luke?" Mark asked. Silas broke in. "She was supposed to come to your house after she was done in town and ride back here with you." "We left a little early. Maybe she missed us," Grandma M suggested. "It wasn't that early," Mark said. His eyes locked with Luke's. Luke felt as if the walls were closing in. The feeling of dread and worry that Christine was in trouble had been with him all day, and already it could be too late. He took control just as the McDonalds walked in the door. "Silas, take Mac's sleigh and ride for the sheriff. I'll go with Mark. Bring him as fast as you can to Grandma M's. Mac, stay here. Sue can explain everything." In a flurry of grabbed coats and hats, the three men were out the door. Luke never would have believed the ride to town could take so long. Mark was whipping the horse into a near frenzy in order to gain speed, but the snow was deep and it seemed as though an eternity had passed. As his stomach churned in fear, Luke allowed himself to imagine that Christine was all right. He pictured her shopping in the general store, ignorant of anyone intending to harm her. But the image did not last. The sense of foreboding, which had rode him hard throughout the day, assured him Christine was in danger. How could he possibly live with himself, knowing his own sin had cost him the most precious person in his life? "Please, God," Luke prayed under his breath as both sleighs nearly flew into town, "please let us be on time." "Take your shoes off." Vince suddenly snapped into Christine's face. When Christine hesitated, again feeling a sickening horror at his change of moods, he picked up the knife. "I've always hated it that you were taller than me." Christine moved quickly to do as he bade. The low-heeled boots made little difference, but he seemed pleased. His eyes were undressing her again, and Christine thought frantically on how to divert his attention. "Vince, do you know anything about Carl Maxwell's death?" "Don't mention that spineless fool to me." He waved the knife around as he spoke. "I needed a new partner to help me with a few things in your grandfather's estate, but he turned out to be a gutless idiot. Oh, he had no trouble drawing up that fake will, but he became quite squirmish when I said you had to die. He thought he was so clever sending you to Fall Creek." "Did you kill that man in Fall Creek?" Christine whispered. No, that was just a freak thing. It caused me a lot of trouble, too, you running all the way down here. It took us forever to find you, and then when we did, my man couldn't even burn a barn properly. Never send a boy to do a man's work." Vince sneered, his face an ugly, scowling mask. What little color was left in Christine's face drained away. The barn burning was attempted murder. "Oh, God," she prayed silently, "please help me." "How many people have you killed in your greed, Vince? What was in Grandfather's will that you had to change? He was good and generous." Christine was crying now, not even sure of what she was saying, and it angered Vince. "Stop your blubbering. Your grandfather was soft. Why, he left over $1,000 to that orphanage. What a waste! Carl Maxwell was soft too, and he got in my way." The sneer in Vince's voice softened as he approached Christine again. "And you're going to find out, Christine. When people get in my way, I must remove them." He was in front of her again, the knife held straight at her. When she felt the tip of the knife move against a button on her blouse and heard it hit the floor, she prayed again, "Please, God, please help me." Luke flashed through her mind. "I'm through with the games now, Christine," Vince said in yet another tone of voice. "Take off the blouse." "No, please, Vince," she whispered. "Take it off," he screamed at her, and Christine felt the knife prick her throat. Visions of another knife in an alley made Christine's hands shake so much she couldn't loosen the buttons. With an angry curse, Vince reached to the neckline of the blouse and yanked. Christine's head was snapped forward and buttons flew everywhere. Her hands came up to hold the gaping blouse together, and she heard her name. "Christine!" Vince turned to the intruding voice, and Christine saw Luke and the sheriff coming into the parlor from the kitchen. Vince spun back quickly and raised the knife over Christine, but a shot rang out, and Christine watched the knife fly from Vince's hand. At that same instant, he clutched his bleeding elbow and began to scream in agony. Christine watched as the sheriff, with little regard for the screaming man's elbow, dragged him from the room. Christine could hear his hysterical tirade, shouting against her grandfather and her until the kitchen door slammed, and the room was covered with an almost eerie silence. Unaware of any other presence in the room, Christine started when she felt gentle hands on her upper arms. Even upon seeing it was Luke, Christine could not help herself from bolting away from his touch. Luke felt a myriad of emotions flood through him as his wife recoiled from him and backed toward the stairs. Her eyes were wide with panic. Her blouse was ripped open, and there was a cut bleeding on her neck. Luke felt sick with the knowledge that this was his fault. He had thought, if they could just be in time, everything would be fine, never once considering the shock his wife would be in. He knew in that instant, if it took the rest of his life, he would put this behind them. He would be there for her, so she would have nothing more to fear. "Christine." Luke's voice was quiet, his eyes moist. At that soft, familiar voice calling her name, Christine seemed to gain a bit of control. "He ripped my blouse," she said, her voice like a lost little girl's, and Luke's heart broke. Luke continued on in the same quiet voice, tenderness in every syllable as his heart overflowed with love for this woman. "It's over now, Christy. He's gone. The sheriff has him, and he can't hurt you any more. It's my fault. I should have told you about the barn fire. I wanted so much to take care of you, and all I did was hurt you. I'm so sorry." Luke's voice broke on these last words. "I was so scared." Christine began to sob. "It's over now." Luke still did not approach her for fear of frightening her more. With his arms outstretched, he said, Come to me, Christy, come and let me hold you. Luke waited until Christine took one step and then covered the distance between them and swept her into his arms. They clung together and cried, tears of frustration, anger, fear, and relief, tears of joy and thanksgiving. Holding tightly to each other, they cried tears that marked the end of a pain-filled season and the beginning of a time for healing.